The day Pauline Wells buried her husband, the sky over Harlan Creek, Texas, was so blue it looked like a lie. She remembered standing at the grave with a shovel still in her hands, because the two men from town had finished their work and walked away, and no one had thought to take it from her. And she had stood there in the November wind of 1879 with red dirt on her boots and her black dress pulling sideways in the gust, and she had not cried. People had expected her to cry. Old Mrs. Hatch had even brought a handkerchief, pressing it into Pauline's palm at the church door, and Pauline had folded it neatly and handed it back because she had not needed it. She had not understood at the time what that meant. She would not understand it for 3 years. Daniel Wells had been a good man, a quiet man who grew wheat on 40 acres east of town and repaired his own fences and never raised his voice to anyone. He had been thrown by a horse on a Tuesday morning while Pauline was inside making bread, and he was dead by Thursday noon. And the doctor from Abilene had driven 3 hours to tell her what the local doctor had already said, which was that there was nothing to be done about a broken spine and a man who could not breathe on his own. She had sat beside him in those 2 days and held his hand and watched him go, and when he went, something in her had gone very quiet and very still, the way a fire goes quiet when you pull all the air away from it. Not out, just still. She was 26 years old when he died. She was 29 now, and she ran the wheat farm alone, with the help of a Mexican hand named Esteban who had worked for Daniel and who stayed on out of loyalty, and because Pauline paid him fairly, which was not something every widow in Harlan Creek could say. She kept the 40 acres going. She kept the house clean. She cooked dinner every evening and ate it at the table alone, and washed the single plate and the single cup, and dried them and set them back in the cabinet. She planted in spring and harvested in fall, and sold her wheat to the grain merchant in town, a thick-necked man named Burl Cassidy who always tried to pay her less than he paid the men, and to whom Pauline had learned to speak with a quiet and absolute precision that left no room for argument. She was not unhappy, exactly. She would not have described herself as unhappy. She would have said she was fine. She would have said the farm was doing well, that Esteban was reliable, that the rains had been good this year. She would not have said that she could not remember the last time she had laughed, because she did not know that. She had simply stopped keeping track. The town of Harlan Creek in 1882 was a place of perhaps 400 souls on a good count, situated along a creek that ran brown and slow in summer and fast and cold in April, with a main street that held a dry goods store, a blacksmith, a livery, a small hotel, a saloon called the Silver Spur, a church, a barber shop, and the post office where Pauline collected her mail every Friday morning. There was a school that ran 9 months of the year, taught by a young woman from Ohio who had come out on the promise of steady work, and who had stayed because she had married the blacksmith. There was a sheriff named Dade Horton who was fair and steady, and who had known Daniel Wells since boyhood, and who tipped his hat to Pauline every time he saw her in a way that carried real sorrow in it even now, 3 years on. It was a Friday in late March when Owen Fletcher rode into Harlan Creek for the first time. Pauline was at the post office, waiting while old Mr. Tibbs sorted through the week's mail with the particular slowness of a man who understood that his job was the most important social function in town and intended to honor it properly. She was wearing her second good dress, the brown one with the small cream buttons at the collar, and her hair was pinned up the way she always wore it in town, neat and firm and practical. She was thinking about the seed order she needed to place, and whether she had enough in the bank account to also replace the broken plow blade, and she was not paying particular attention to the sound of hoofbeats on the main street outside, because hoofbeats were a constant and unremarkable fact of life in Harlan Creek, Texas, in the year of our Lord 1882. But then the hoofbeats stopped, and there was a particular kind of crash that brought everyone in the post office to the window, which was the sound of a horse and rider going sideways through the water trough outside the livery. Not violently, not in a way that suggested injury. More in the way that suggested a horse had made an executive decision to stop at the water trough, and the rider had not anticipated the commitment with which the horse would act on this decision. The horse simply planted its feet and dropped its head, and the rider, who had been sitting comfortably in the saddle as though he had all the time and ease in the world, went forward over the horse's neck in a slow and almost dignified arc and landed with both hands in the water trough. He came up dripping. He stood in the street with water streaming from his hat brim and his shirt front soaked through, and the horse standing behind him drinking contentedly from the trough he had just vacated. And he looked down at himself for a long moment, and then he looked at the horse, and he said, loudly enough that the people at the post office window could hear him clearly, "Well, I cannot even argue with you. I was thirsty too." There was laughter from the post office. There was laughter from the barber shop doorway. Old Tibbs laughed until he had to set down the mail. Pauline did not laugh. But she watched through the window as the wet cowboy pushed his soaked hat back on his head and walked over to his horse, and gave it a pat on the nose with the sort of easy affection that said he genuinely did not mind, and something small and unidentifiable moved in her chest, like a door opening a crack in a room that had been closed a long time, and then closing again just as quickly. She collected her mail. A bill from the seed supplier, a letter from her sister in Kansas, a notice about the Springtown meeting. She folded them into her basket and walked out of the post office and into the street, and she would have walked directly to her wagon and driven home, except that the wet cowboy was standing at the livery entrance speaking to Jem Hooper, the livery man, and Jem's livery was between the post office and the spot where Pauline's wagon was tied. She had to walk past him. She walked with her head up and her eyes forward, the way she always walked in town, with the particular purposeful calm of a woman who had learned to move through public spaces without inviting conversation. And she would have made it clean past if the cowboy had not stepped back at exactly the wrong moment and directly into her path. She stopped. He stopped. He turned around. Up close, he was perhaps 30, maybe 32, with a sun-dark face and brown eyes that had laugh lines already pressed deep around them, which told her something about his character even before he opened his mouth. He was tall, not in an imposing way, but in the way of a man who simply took up his natural space in the world. He had good hands, she noticed, the kind scarred and calloused from real work. His shirt was still dripping. "Ma'am," he said, and pulled off his soaked hat, which released a small waterfall onto the street between them. He looked at the water, then at her, with an expression of such genuine and uncomplicated sheepishness that it was almost extraordinary. "I apologize for the nearness of that." "No harm done," Pauline said. Her voice was what it always was in town, pleasant and neutral. "Owen Fletcher," he said, putting out his damp hand and then looking at it and pulling it back. "Maybe I'll wait on the handshake." "Pauline Wells," she said. "Mrs. Wells," he said, because he was noting the lack of a ring but not assuming, which was the polite thing to do. "Yes," she said, neither confirming nor denying whether the Mrs. was current or historical because it was neither of his business. "Are you passing through?" "I am," he said, and then paused. I'm looking for work. I heard there were ranches hiring east of here. I've been riding up from San Antonio." "The Garland Ranch is hiring," she said. 15 miles east. Ask for Pete Garland. He's a fair man." "Much obliged," Owen Fletcher said, and his voice was warm and genuine, not the automatic politeness of a man being polite, but the warmth of a man who was actually grateful for useful information. "I'll ride out that way this afternoon, once I've dried out some." He smiled at her then, a small, real smile, and Pauline nodded and walked to her wagon and climbed up and drove home, and she did not think about Owen Fletcher again for the rest of the day. Or at least she tried not to, though he appeared briefly in her mind around supper time as she ate her plate of beans and cornbread alone at the table, and she set the thought aside the way she set aside anything that did not need attending to, and ate her meal in silence and washed her plate and went to bed. He was at the post office the following Friday. She had not expected that. He had said he was going to the Garland Ranch, and the Garland Ranch was 15 miles east, which meant he should have been sorting his mail from the little postal drop at the Garland store, not standing in the Harlan Creek post office on a Friday morning reading what appeared to be a catalog with great personal investment in its contents. He looked up when she came in and he recognized her immediately, and his face did the thing she had noticed before, the warm brightness of genuine recognition, not performed gladness, the way some men put on welcome like a coat. "Mrs. Wells," he said. "Mr. Fletcher," she said. "I thought you would have been at the Garland Ranch by now." "I was," he said. "Pete Garland is a fair man, like you said. He gave me work and a bunk. I rode in because I needed some things from the dry goods store and because I'll be honest with you, I'm already tired of the taste of the Garland cook's coffee, and the hotel here does a breakfast that's supposed to be something." "The hotel breakfast is fine," Pauline said, because it was. Mrs. Greer, who ran the hotel, had come from Tennessee and made biscuits that people talked about. "Will you join me?" He asked, and it came out so naturally, without guile or performance, simply a question one person asked another, that for a moment she almost said yes before her practical mind reasserted itself. "I have a farm to get back to," she said. "Another time, maybe," he said, pleasantly, without pressure, and went back to his catalog. She collected her mail and went to the dry goods store herself, because she needed lamp oil, and she encountered him there as well, where he was at the counter buying tobacco and debating with Milt Greer about the relative merits of two different brands with the focused seriousness of a man who took his comforts earnestly. He tipped his hat to her, she nodded back, and that was all. But the following Friday he was there again, and the Friday after that. It became, over the span of 6 weeks, an unremarkable and then quietly expected thing. Owen Fletcher came to Harlan Creek on Friday mornings, and Pauline Wells collected her mail on Friday mornings, and they occupied the same spaces for an hour or two each week. He always spoke to her, and she always answered him, and the conversations were short and practical and about things like the price of grain, and the state of the road east after the last rain, and whether old Mr. Tibbs was ever going to get a proper sorting system for the mail or whether alphabetical order was genuinely beyond him at this stage of his life. Pauline told herself this was simply the nature of small-town life. In Harlan Creek, you saw the same people every week. It meant nothing particular. It was the 3rd week of May when things shifted. Esteban came to her at dawn with his hat in his hands, which meant bad news, and the bad news was that he had had a letter from his mother in Laredo saying she was ill, and he needed to go south to see about her. Pauline told him to go, without hesitation, because she was not the kind of person who held a man from his mother, and he was gone by mid-morning, and she was alone on 40 acres of wheat that needed attention. She managed the 1st week. The 2nd week was harder. By the 3rd week, a section of the north fence had come down, and 2 of her chickens had gotten into the wheat field, and she had pulled a muscle in her shoulder wrestling a stuck gate, and the pump had begun making a sound that suggested the leather seal was giving out, and she went a Friday mail call looking tired in a way she could not conceal from herself when she passed the mirror that morning. Not that she spent much time looking in mirrors. Owen saw it the moment she walked into the post office. He did not make a fuss about it. He did not say, "You look tired," which would have annoyed her. He waited until she had her mail and was walking out, and then he fell into step beside her in a completely natural way, as though they had been walking out together for years. "Your hired man left," he said. "How did you know that?" "Jem Hooper," he said. "Word moves in small towns." "It does," she agreed. "I've got Sunday free," he said. "Pete Garland doesn't work his hands on Sunday mornings. I'm a capable hand with a pump seal, and I know something about fence mending." She stopped walking and looked at him. He looked back at her with those steady brown eyes, not eager, not performing charity, just a man making a straightforward offer. "I don't take charity," she said. "I'm not offering charity," he said. "I'm offering to help a neighbor, which is a different thing. You'd do the same if I were the one with a broke pump." She thought about the pump making its grinding noise. She thought about the section of fence and the chickens. She thought about her shoulder, which was still complaining. "I'll feed you dinner," she said. "That's more than fair," he said. He came on Sunday at 8 in the morning, riding up the lane on his horse, which Pauline had come to understand was named Cass, and had the temperament of a horse who had made his own decisions for so long that he had essentially become a full partner in whatever Owen was doing rather than a tool of it. He tied Cass at the post, came around to the back of the house where Pauline was already working, assessed the situation with his eyes and got to it. He did the pump first. He had brought the right tools and a new leather seal in his saddlebag, which meant he had thought about it before coming, which told her something about him. He worked quietly and efficiently, and when the pump ran smooth and clean, he moved to the fence without being asked. And when the fence was mended, he looked at the chicken coop, and without saying anything at all spent an hour reinforcing the door latch so that the chickens could not get loose again. Pauline worked beside him where she could and got the other chores done where she couldn't, and at noon she brought out dinner at the table outside, because the day was fine and warm, and it was beans and salt pork and cornbread and coffee, honest food, and he ate it with the appreciation of a man who had been living on camp food for months and meant every compliment he gave. They talked at dinner the way people talk when they have been working together and are tired and easy with each other. He told her he was from Missouri originally, that he had come west at 18 and had been working cattle and horses ever since, moving from ranch to ranch. He was 31. He had never married, not because he had not wanted to, but because the life he had been living did not leave much room for it, always moving, always on another man's land doing another man's work. "Do you want to stay somewhere?" she asked. He looked at her across the table, and there was something in the way he did it that was different from how he looked at things generally, a quality of care in it that made her set down her coffee cup. "I'm starting to think I might," he said. She picked her coffee back up and looked at the wheat field. "The Garland Ranch is good land," she said. "It is," he agreed, and did not push further, and she liked him for that too. He came back the next Sunday, without being asked but also without assuming, just arriving at 8 in the morning with his tools and Cass, and a particular way of announcing his presence by tying his horse first and then knocking, which struck her as a considerate sequence. There was always something to be done on a farm of 40 acres, and she let him help because it was practical and not because she needed the company, which is what she told herself, and which was mostly true for the first few Sundays. The Sunday after the fourth one, Esteban came back. His mother had recovered, which was a blessing, and he was grateful to Pauline for the time and ready to return to work, and Pauline was genuinely glad to see him because he was a reliable and good man, and the farm ran better with him. She thought that might be the end of the Sunday visits. She assumed Owen would no longer have a reason to come if the practical need was met. He came the following Sunday anyway, with a bag of good coffee from the dry goods store, which was a thing he had apparently decided to bring because he had strong opinions about coffee and felt that everyone deserved better coffee on a Sunday. He knocked at the back door and held up the bag and said, "I'm not here to work. I thought we might just drink coffee and be still for an hour if that suits you." It suited her. She boiled the coffee and they sat on the back porch in the morning light and drank it and watched a pair of scissor-tailed flycatchers perform their aerial acrobatics over the wheat field, and they talked. And the talking was easy and wide and interesting in a way that talking had not been for Pauline in a long time. He had read broadly for a man who had lived a mostly outdoor life. He had opinions about things. He was funny, not in a loud or performing way, but in the way of a man who saw the world at a slight tilt that made the ordinary seem strange and the strange seem ordinary. He told stories about the horses he had known, and every story somehow ended with the horse making a better decision than anyone expected, and she found herself listening with a genuine attention she had forgotten she was capable of. She did not laugh, but she smiled once at the story about a cutting horse named Biscuit who had apparently developed a personal opinion about which cattle deserved to be separated from the herd and which did not, and had acted on these opinions with a certainty that the rancher had eventually found simpler to accommodate than argue with. She smiled, and Owen Fletcher noticed it and said nothing at all, just kept talking. The Sundays became a fixture. June moved into July, and the wheat needed attention, and the heat of the Texas summer descended on Harlan Creek like something physical and deliberate. And still Owen Fletcher came on Sunday mornings with his coffee and his easy manner and his good honest talk. There was an evening in late July when she came into the dry goods store on a Tuesday to pick up her lamp oil order, and he was there by accident, getting supplies for the ranch, and they talked for an hour in the corner of the store while Milt pretended to organize shelves and actually listened to every word. She did not notice the time passing. She noticed only that the evening light was dying when she finally said she needed to get home, and he walked her to her wagon, and for a moment they stood beside it with the warm air moving and the sound of the silver spur carrying from down the street, and there was something between them that was large and unsaid. He helped her up into the wagon seat, his hand at her elbow, brief and proper, and he stepped back and tipped his hat, and she drove home, and she sat at her table that evening not eating her dinner because she was thinking. She was thinking about Daniel. She was thinking about the blue sky on the day she buried him and the shovel she had not been relieved of and the handkerchief she had given back. She was thinking about the 3 years since, the quiet and the stillness, the plate and the cup washed and dried and put back every night. She was thinking about whether it was a betrayal to want something different, to want the quiet to mean something other than absence. She did not know the answer to this. She went to bed without it. The next Friday at the post office, she arrived to find Owen already there, and also to find Burl Cassidy, the grain merchant, standing close to Owen and speaking in a low and unpleasant tone about a matter Pauline could not hear. Owen was standing with the particular stillness of a man who was being provoked and choosing not to be provoked, which was a quality she had observed in him before, and which she respected deeply. She collected her mail and stood nearby, and when Burl's voice rose slightly, she heard enough to understand that Burl was telling Owen Fletcher that he was a drifter and an outsider, and that Harlan Creek had enough of those, and that he should take himself back to wherever he had come from. Owen said, quietly and without heat, "I work for Pete Garland and I come to this town on my free time, and I pay for what I buy and I mind my own affairs. I believe that entitles me to collect my mail in peace." "It's the widow Wells I'm talking about," Burl said, lower but still audible, and Pauline went still. "I don't believe that's any of your business," Owen said. "This is a small town," Burl said. "Everything is everyone's business. That is a convenient position for people who prefer other people's business to their own," Owen said, still without heat, and walked to the counter, finished his business, and came out into the street where Pauline was already walking. She fell into step beside him because she wanted to, and she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I've been managing Burl Cassidy's opinions about my life for 3 years." "I know that too," he said. "I apologize if I overstepped." "You didn't," she said, and stopped walking and looked at him directly. "I want to say something to you." He stopped and looked at her, giving her his full attention the way he always did, which was one of the things about him that she had come to notice and depend on without meaning to. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that. I don't know what it is and I don't know what I want it to be yet. I'm still working that out." He nodded, without disappointment, without pressure. "That's honest," he said. "I'm not a woman who isn't sure about things generally," she said. "I'm sure about most things. This is an exception." "It's allowed to be," he said. "I'm telling you so that you understand I'm not being careless about it," she said. "I am taking it seriously." "So am I," he said. They stood in the street in the July heat, and she felt the something between them that had been large and unsaid for weeks, and it was large still but slightly less unsaid, and that seemed like progress. "Sunday," she said. "Sunday," he agreed. He brought good coffee, and she made a proper breakfast this time, eggs and biscuits, not because she was trying to impress him but because she wanted to, and that itself was a small revelation. They sat at the kitchen table. The first time they had been inside together rather than on the porch, and it felt natural in a way she had not prepared herself for. The sight of him at her kitchen table with coffee and a plate of biscuits, the morning light through the east window lying across the table between them. Esteban came in from the barn after a while, nodded at Owen with the cautious assessment of a man who cared about his employer's well-being, and Owen stood up and put out his hand and introduced himself. And Esteban shook it and sat down and had coffee, and the three of them talked about the wheat crop and the chances of rain in August. And Esteban later told Pauline in the direct way he had that she had always valued. He seemed steady. Steady men are not always easy to find. No, she agreed. They are not. It was August when the town meeting happened, the one where the question of the new water rights along Harlan Creek came up, which was the kind of dispute that in 1882 in a Texas town could become genuinely ugly if the wrong people pushed too hard. There were cattle ranchers along the creek who wanted to dam a section for their stock, and there were farmers downriver who depended on the unobstructed flow for their fields. And Pauline was among the farmers, and she said so clearly and calmly at the town meeting in the church building on a warm Wednesday evening. She laid out her argument with precision and reference to the prior agreements that had been made when the town was settled, and several of the cattle ranchers argued back, and she held her ground without raising her voice. And when the meeting was over and the question had been tabled for further discussion rather than resolved, which was the political version of kicking a problem forward, she walked out into the evening air feeling the particular frustration of a battle well fought and not yet won. Owen had come to the meeting because Pete Garland had an interest in it too, though Garland's land was not directly involved. He came up beside her outside and she was still composing herself, and he said, "You made a sound argument." "It didn't carry," she said. "Not tonight," he said, "but you laid the foundation. Those things take more than one meeting." "I know that," she said, more sharply than she intended because she was tired and frustrated, and then she looked at him and said, "I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for," he said. "You're right to be frustrated. You're fighting for something real." She looked at him for a long moment in the evening light, the stars beginning in the east, the sounds of the meeting breaking up around them, and something in her chest did the thing it had been doing increasingly often, that sense of a door opening, and this time it stayed open a little longer. "Walk me to my wagon," she said. He did. And at the wagon he said, "Can I take you to supper on Friday? At the hotel, not just coffee, a proper supper." She thought about it for exactly the amount of time it required, which was perhaps 3 seconds, and then she said, "Yes." The hotel supper on Friday was the first time she had been taken to supper by a man since Daniel, and she had thought she might feel strange about it, but she did not feel strange. She felt present, which was itself a kind of surprise, the sense of being fully in the moment rather than partly somewhere else. They sat by the window in the hotel dining room and had the roast chicken, which was good, and they talked for 2 hours, not about practical things as they usually did, but about bigger things, what they wanted, what they believed, what they thought life was for. He told her about his family in Missouri, a father who had been a hard man but fair, 2 brothers, one still in Missouri and one dead of fever at 16, which he spoke of plainly but with a sadness that had clearly been lived with for a long time. She told him about her sister in Kansas, about growing up in the hill country south of Austin, about her parents who had built something from very little and taught her that work was its own kind of dignity. She told him about Daniel, too, because it seemed necessary and honest. She told him about who Daniel had been, the quiet goodness of him, the gentleness, and how she had loved him in the way you love something that is steady and true and permanent, and how losing him had been losing a piece of the world she had built herself in. Owen listened to all of this without flinching, and without trying to position himself as different or better, which would have been the wrong thing to do, and which she had feared he might do in the way some men did, trying to claim space that wasn't theirs yet. He simply listened, and when she was done he said, "He sounds like a good man. You were fortunate to have someone like that." "I was," she said. "I hope I can be the kind of man worth knowing in the same way," he said. "Not the same way. My own way. Just worth knowing." She looked at him across the table. "You already are," she said, and it was the truest and most uncalculated thing she had said to anyone in 3 years, and saying it felt like setting something down that she had been carrying without knowing it. He walked her to her wagon after supper, and this time when they stood at the wagon he took her hand, just held it, nothing more, and she looked down at their hands and then up at him, and he said quietly, "Is this all right?" "Yes," she said. He let go of her hand when she climbed up to the wagon seat, and he stood in the street and watched her go. And she did not look back, but she knew he was watching, and the knowing of it was warm in a way she had not felt warm in a long time. September came in dry and gold, and the harvest was good, and Esteban and Pauline worked the wheat together, and Owen came out on his free days to help, not because he had been asked, but because the farm was becoming a place he gravitated toward the way water gravitates toward lower ground, naturally and without argument. He was good company in work, which was a thing Pauline considered important, the kind of person you could stand alongside in silence doing hard physical labor and feel better for the company rather than drained by it. One afternoon in the middle of harvest, with the sun very high and hot, and all three of them pulling hard to get the last of the wheat in before the weather turned, something happened. Owen was working with the cart horse, guiding the loaded wagon across the uneven ground, and the wheel caught a rut that was hidden by the dry grass, and the wagon tilted sharply, and Owen went sideways off the wagon seat, and he managed to catch himself on the wheel and not go all the way down, but the position he ended up in was genuinely undignified. Half hanging off the wheel with his hat somehow still on his head, entirely perpendicular to where he was supposed to be. He turned his head and looked at Pauline, who had stopped working to watch this unfold, and he said, from his sideways position, with perfect gravity, "I want you to know that I am fully in control of this situation." And Pauline Wells laughed. She laughed before she knew she was laughing, before any part of her mind had the chance to intercept it or manage it. The laugh simply came out of her the way a river comes out of the ground in spring, without permission and without warning, full and real and completely unstoppable. It was not a polite laugh or a small laugh. It was a laugh that started in her stomach and came all the way up, and it bent her forward slightly, and she had to put her hand on the fence post to keep her balance, and she laughed and could not stop. She did not know that she had not laughed in 3 years. She did not know it until she was already in the middle of laughing and could not stop, and something about the laughter itself told her, the way a muscle you have not used in a very long time announces itself when you finally use it again, with a kind of aching relief, a recognition of absence that only becomes possible in the moment of return. Esteban stopped working and looked at her with wide eyes, because he had worked alongside this woman for more than 3 years, and he had never heard her laugh, not once, and the sound of it was so real and so unguarded that it was almost startling, like hearing a bell ring that you had forgotten existed. Owen extricated himself from the wagon wheel with some effort and stood up and straightened his hat, and he was grinning, the full real grin of a man who has just witnessed something he will remember. And he did not say anything at first, because some things are better not commented on, and he was wise enough to know it. Pauline straightened up, still breathing unsteadily from the laughing, and she pressed her hand to her chest and looked at Owen, and there were tears on her face, which surprised her so much she raised her hand to touch them, and she did not know if they were from laughing or from something else, from the recognition of what she had just discovered was missing, or from the fact that it was not missing anymore. "I haven't laughed in 3 years," she said, and the saying of it was like opening a window. Owen looked at her, and his face had something in it that was very tender and very still, like a man holding something fragile. "You can have it back," he said, "all of it, if you want it." She wiped her face with the back of her hand and took a breath and looked at the wheat field and the gold sky over it, and the man standing in front of her with his hat tilted from his wrestling match with the wagon wheel, and something in her that had been very still for 3 years began, quietly and with great certainty, to move. "Let's finish the harvest," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They finished the harvest. That evening Pauline made a supper big enough for 3, which she had not done since before Daniel died, and they ate at the table inside and talked until the stars were full in the sky. And when Owen and Esteban both finally left, Pauline washed not 1 plate and 1 cup but 3 plates and 3 cups, and she dried them and put them back, and she stood in her kitchen in the lamplight, and held onto the sound of her own laughter the way you hold onto the memory of a dream that you know is important. She slept better that night than she had in 3 years. October brought the kind of weather that Texas did best in autumn: cool mornings and warm afternoons and evenings that smelled of cedar and dry grass. And Owen Fletcher came to the farm not just on Sundays now, but on the other days his schedule allowed, which Pete Garland had begun to understand was a matter of a man going where his heart was pointed. And Pete Garland was a decent man who had been married for 20 years and understood the pull of that particular gravity. Owen and Pauline were not in any hurry, or at least they had agreed without words to not be in any hurry, which was its own kind of understanding. What they were was present, deeply and completely present with each other, in a way that Pauline had not been present in 3 years, not because she had not wanted to be, but because there had been no one to be present with, no one who called that quality out of her. He made her laugh again, often, not always with slapstick, not always with the accidental comedy of a man versus a wagon wheel. Sometimes it was the tilt of his perspective on something, the way he noticed the absurd in the ordinary and held it up for inspection. Sometimes it was a story. Sometimes it was a single observation, delivered with such perfect dry timing that she was laughing before she had registered the joke. She had not known what she was missing. She had been so accustomed to the quiet that the quiet had seemed normal, had seemed like the natural condition of her life going forward. And now she understood that the quiet had been a kind of grief that she had never named as grief because she had never connected it to anything she had lost. She had grieved Daniel. She had not known she was also grieving herself. Owen understood this about her, or intuited it without requiring explanation, which was the thing about him that she had come to understand was his most remarkable quality. He did not need her to explain herself to him. He paid attention, which was a different and better thing. One Sunday in late October, she was sitting on the porch steps in the afternoon with a cup of tea, watching the light change over the wheat field, which was now just stubble and good dark earth resting for winter. And Owen came and sat on the step below hers without asking, which she had long since stopped minding, and leaned his back against the post and looked at the same field. And they sat in a quiet that was nothing like the quiet of the past 3 years. A full quiet, a quiet with another person in it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. "Not today," he said. "I want to ask you something, but I want to ask it properly, and properly takes some time to arrange." She looked down at the top of his head, his hair showing beneath the hat he had taken off when he sat down, and she felt the warmth of knowing what he meant and the warmth of wanting him to take the time, both at once. "Take the time," she said. The question came on a Sunday in November, 2 weeks after that, on a morning that was cold enough to see your breath and bright enough to ache with it. He had arrived at his usual time, and they had had breakfast and talked about nothing of great consequence for an hour, which was itself something Pauline had come to treasure. The conversations about nothing important, the ease of it. Then he put down his coffee cup and looked at her across the table. "Pauline," he said. She looked back at him. "I'm not a man with much," he said. "I have the money I've saved from the past 5 years of work, which is not a fortune but is solid. I have Cass, who makes his own decisions about matters, as you know. I have the offer from Pete Garland to buy the east parcel of his land, the 40 acres bordering his, at a price that's fair. I have a strong back and a willing nature, and the deep conviction that you are the finest person I have ever known, and that I would like, with your permission, to spend the rest of my life being in your vicinity and making you laugh whenever possible." She pressed her lips together, not to prevent a smile because the smile was already happening, but to keep herself in the moment, to stay fully present in it. "That is not the shortest proposal I've ever heard," she said. "I have more if you want it," he said. "Is there a question in there somewhere?" "There is," he said, and he stood up from the table, and he was serious now, the particular seriousness of a man who means everything he is saying, and he said, "Will you marry me, Pauline Wells? Will you let me be your partner on this land, and your husband and your company, and your reason to have 3 plates washed instead of 1? She stood up too, because this was not a moment to be sitting down for. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Owen Fletcher, I will." He came around the table, and he took her hands in his, both of them, his warm, calloused hands around hers, and he looked at her with everything in his face that had been building for months, all of the warmth and the patience and the genuine regard. And she looked back at him with everything that had been building in her, the warmth that had been waking up since March, the laugh that had come back in September, the full living presence of a woman who had remembered how to be present. He kissed her, and it was a proper kiss, not tentative but not hurried, the kiss of 2 people who had taken the long way around to each other and intended to arrive fully, and she kissed him back in the same spirit. They were married on the first Saturday of December, 1882, in the Harlan Creek church, with Sheriff Horton giving a reading because Pauline had no family close enough to make the journey, and Esteban standing witness on one side and Mrs. Greer from the hotel on the other, who wept happily because she had been watching the whole thing unfold over Friday breakfasts and had strong personal feelings about its resolution. Pete Garland came and brought his wife, and half the town came too, because Harlan Creek was a town of 400 people, and a wedding was something everyone wanted to see. Burl Cassidy did not come, and no one missed him. Pauline wore her best dress, the dark blue one she had bought the year before Daniel died and had not worn since, and she had let out the hem slightly, and added a piece of cream lace at the collar that she had ordered from the dry goods catalog. And she wore her hair differently, not the tight practical pins of her daily life but softer, with pieces at her temples, and when she walked into the church on the arm of old Mr. Tibbs, who had volunteered for the duty with such eager kindness that she had not been able to refuse him, she looked like herself at her best, which was a thing she had not tried to be in 3 years, and which felt, in this particular moment, entirely right. Owen was waiting at the front of the church in a new jacket and clean boots, and his face when he saw her was something she would remember for the rest of her life. The way a man looks when he sees the thing he has been hoping for, and it turns out to be as real and as true as he had hoped, the relief and the joy of that together. And she walked toward it with her chin up and her eyes bright, and the smile of a woman who had come fully back to herself. They spoke the old words and meant them, both of them, and when the minister said they were married, Owen Fletcher kissed his wife with the whole church watching, and Pauline Wells, who was now Pauline Fletcher, laughed against his mouth because of the enthusiastic applause from Mrs. Greer, and the laugh rang out in the church as clear and warm and real as a bell. And old Esteban in the front pew pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling and blinked rapidly several times. The winter of 1882 going into 1883 was a new thing, the experience of a winter spent with someone rather than alone in it. Owen had moved into the farmhouse after the wedding, and his presence in it changed the quality of every room, not because he was loud or demanding, but because he was simply there, another body in the space, his boots by the door and his jacket on the hook, and his voice asking where the extra lamp oil was kept, and what she thought about moving the woodpile closer to the kitchen door to save steps in the cold. They talked about everything. They talked in the mornings over coffee and in the evenings by the fire, and sometimes late at night when the wind came down from the north and rattled the windows, and they lay in the dark talking about the farm and the future, about the east parcel that Owen was in the process of buying from Pete Garland, about whether they should put more of it in wheat or try a section of corn, about the water rights dispute which was still ongoing, and which Pauline had not given up on, about what they wanted from the life they were building. The water rights issue resolved in February, when the county surveyor came out to Harlan Creek at the request of 4 of the downstream farmers, including Pauline, and reviewed the original land grants and creek surveys, and found that the prior agreements Pauline had cited at the August meeting were legally binding and enforceable. The cattle ranchers who had wanted to dam the creek were not pleased about this, but they were not the kind of men who broke the law openly, and the dam plan died. Pauline came home from the final meeting and sat down at the kitchen table, and Owen put coffee in front of her, and she told him it was done, and he said, "I knew you'd get it." And she felt the satisfaction of it go through her, the way good news goes through you when you have earned it. The East Parcel purchase closed in March, on the anniversary of Owen's first ride into Harlan Creek and into the water trough, which he pointed out with great ceremony, and which made her laugh in the way she laughed at him now, freely and fully, the laugh she had not laughed for 3 years now, given back to her with interest. They planted the new parcel in corn that first spring, because the soil on that side was different from the wheat field, and Owen had spent the winter reading everything he could find about the crop rotation and soil conditions, the way he approached every problem, with quiet and steady inquiry. Esteban, who had been offered a permanent and properly paid position on what was now a significantly larger operation, took on the corn with the same reliable competence he brought to everything. The summer of 1883 was the best Pauline could remember. The crops were good and the farm was growing, and her husband was someone she could talk to and laugh with and work beside and be silent with. And all of these things were gifts she had not known she was going to receive when she drove into Harlan Creek on a Friday morning in March of 1882, thinking about seed orders and plow blades. It was September when she told Owen she was expecting a child. She told him in the kitchen in the morning before coffee, because she had been turning the knowledge over in herself for 2 weeks and deciding how to say it, and she had decided finally that there was no particular how. There was only saying it, which she did, directly and plainly in the way she did most things. He sat down. She had expected gladness and she got it, but she also got something else, a fullness in him, the look of a man receiving something he had hoped for in a deep and private place that he had not spoken aloud, because hoping aloud makes hope heavier to carry if it doesn't come. "Are you well?" he said first, which was the question she had expected least and which told her everything about who he was. "I'm well," she said. He stood up and came to her and held her face in his hands and looked at her, and she let herself be looked at fully and without deflection, the way she had learned to with him over the past year. "I am so glad," he said. "I'm so glad it's you." She put her hands over his. "So am I," she said. The pregnancy was unremarkable in the good sense, which was the best thing a pregnancy could be in 1883 in Texas, where unremarkable meant everything was as it should be. Pauline was strong and healthy and practical about it, as she was practical about everything, and she continued working the farm with accommodations for what her body required. And Owen fussed somewhat, and she told him not to fuss, and he fussed slightly less but never entirely stopped, which she had anticipated and had budgeted some energy for. There was a day in late November when she was getting round and slow with it, when Owen came in from the East Parcel and found her sitting at the kitchen table looking out the window at the bare winter fields, and he sat across from her and didn't say anything for a while, and then he said, "What are you thinking about?" "Daniel," she said, because she was, and she was not afraid to say it. Owen nodded. "Is that all right?" she asked, because she wanted to know. "Of course it is," he said, with no hesitation and no flinching. "He was real and you loved him, and he was part of making you who you are. That's not something that goes away, and it shouldn't go away." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I love you," she said, and it was the first time she had said it plainly like that, without it being embedded in a gesture or a look or the way she said his name. She had felt it for months. She was saying it now. He turned his hand over and held hers. "I love you," he said back, and the plainness of it matched hers. Two people saying true things to each other in a kitchen in November with the winter fields outside and a child coming in the spring, and the whole weight and warmth of a life being built. The baby came in May, on a warm afternoon with the sound of the creek running high from spring rains, and it was a boy. Owen was there for the whole of it, which was not the custom but which Pauline had simply refused to negotiate, and Dr. Caldwell, the new doctor who had come to Harlan Creek in January fresh from medical school in Austin, was too young and too new to argue with a woman who spoke in that particular tone, and so Owen held her hand and she held his back, and when the baby came and cried his first full-lung cry, Owen pressed his forehead against Pauline's temple and breath for a long moment without speaking. "What do you want to name him?" Owen asked. "Eli," she said. "For my father." "Eli Fletcher," Owen said, and said it again, trying it on, and smiled. "It's a good name." "It is," she said, and looked at the child in her arms, this new person who had not been in the world this morning and was now in it utterly, pink and furious, and already looking around as though he had opinions about the quality of the light. She laughed softly, looking at her son's expression. Owen looked at her laughing at their son, and his own face did something complicated and beautiful. The summer of 1884 passed with a new texture to it, a texture of exhaustion and joy, and a new rhythm in the household, the particular rhythm of a baby who woke in the night and needed things, and who was growing so fast it seemed like you could watch it happening. Owen was a natural father in the way he had been natural at most things, without performance, just present and capable and genuinely delighted by his son, who was a serious and observant child who looked at everything with wide brown eyes that had come from Owen's side, and a set to his chin that was absolutely his mother's. Esteban, who had by now become something closer to family than employee, was Eli's devoted audience whenever Pauline needed an extra pair of eyes on the baby. And Eli rewarded this devotion by grabbing Esteban's finger and holding on with fierce determination, which Esteban reported to everyone who would listen as evidence of remarkable strength and character. By the fall of 1884, the farm was operating on 80 acres, the corn and wheat together, with Esteban managing the east parcel largely independently now and Owen working both sides. The water rights were secure. The fence was sound. The pump ran without a complaint in the world. On a Friday in September, Pauline went to the post office for her mail, and it was exactly as it had always been on Fridays, the quiet routine of the week, but this time she walked in with Eli on her hip, 14 months old and already trying to operate the world from a standing position whenever anyone allowed him, and she was laughing at something he had done in the wagon, some grand and failed attempt to grab at the morning air. And she walked into the post office still laughing, and old Mr. Tibbs looked up from his sorting and said, "Mrs. Fletcher, that boy has your husband's expression when he's determined about something." "He has his father's stubbornness," she agreed, "and he has the decency to be handsome with it." Tibbs laughed. Pauline bounced Eli on her hip, and he grabbed for her collar button with the focused intensity that characterized everything he did, and she covered his hand with hers and looked out the window at the main street of Harlan Creek, at the street she had walked for 3 years alone and quiet and going through the motions, and she thought about how different the same street could look depending on where you were standing inside yourself. She thought about the laugh that had come out of her in the wheat field on a September afternoon a year ago, that had come out of her without warning after 3 years of silence. She thought about not knowing it was gone until it came back. She thought about Owen hanging sideways off a wagon wheel with his hat still on, telling her he was fully in control of the situation. She was still smiling when he came into the post office a few minutes later, having ridden in from the farm behind her to pick up supplies, his hat pushed back the way it always was now, Eli reaching for him immediately from Pauline's arms with the single-minded ambition of a child who has spotted the preferred person. Owen took his son and held him against his chest, and Eli grabbed his collar with both hands and looked up at him with enormous satisfaction, and Owen looked at Pauline over the baby's head. "What are you smiling at?" he asked. "Nothing in particular," she said. "Everything." He smiled back. They collected their mail and walked out into the September morning together, the three of them, into the wide sky and the clean air and the life they had made from nothing more complicated than two people paying attention to each other. The years that followed were years of building, and the building was good. By 1886, the farm had expanded again, this time not in acreage but in operation, because Owen had put in a small stable for 2 horses beyond the working animals, good stock that he bought carefully and bred for the particular qualities that made a ranch horse valuable. And this modest beginning of a breeding program had found buyers among the ranches around Harlan Creek and as far as Abilene. He had a good eye for horses, which no one who had witnessed his arrival via water trough would have doubted, and Pete Garland had been his first reference and his most reliable advertisement. Pauline managed the accounts for both the farm operation and the horse breeding with the same precise and undeceived intelligence she brought to everything that involved numbers and fair exchange. And she continued to show up at town meetings when water and land and fair treatment were the subject. And she continued to make her arguments in her clear and measured voice. And she continued to win more of them than she lost. Esteban had married in 1885. A woman named Rosario from Laredo, who had come north with his mother when his mother finally recovered well enough to travel, and who had looked at the operation. Esteban worked on and then looked at Esteban, and decided she could make a life here. Pauline had been genuinely glad of this, had helped where she could, and invited them both to the table as a matter of course, because Esteban was family in every way that mattered, and Rosario was a woman of sense and warmth who taught Pauline 3 of her mother's recipes, and who became the person Pauline talked to about things that did not involve farming or water rights. Eli grew from a baby into a small and serious person who had discovered that horses were the most interesting subject in the known world, a position on which he and his father were in complete agreement, and who followed Owen around the stable from the time he could walk with the devotion and focused attention of a dedicated apprentice. He was a solemn child by temperament, deliberate where his father was easy, but he had Owen's laugh lines coming in early, and he had his mother's absolute directness, which combination produced a person who said exactly what he thought and then laughed at himself if necessary, which was a quality Pauline found herself admiring daily. In the spring of 1887, Pauline told Owen she was expecting again. "You're sure?" he said. "I have been through this before," she said. "I am quite sure." He was sitting at the kitchen table, and he leaned back in his chair with a look of such full and uncomplicated happiness that she sat down across from him just to be close to it. "Eli's going to have opinions about this," Owen said. "Eli has opinions about everything," she said. "That's true," Owen agreed, and they both laughed, and it was their laugh, the particular shared laugh of 2 people who know each other's rhythms, the laugh of a couple who had built something real and who knew it and were not afraid to enjoy it. The second child was a girl, born in November of 1887, during the first hard cold snap of the season, which Pauline felt was entirely characteristic of this child based on available evidence, arriving on the coldest day of the month with maximum inconvenience and no apologies for it. They named her Clara, for Owen's mother who had died when Owen was 12, a name he had carried around and never had occasion to use until now. Clara Fletcher arrived loud and indignant and already looking for something to grab, and Eli, who was 4 and had been brought in to meet her with the solemnity of a person being introduced to a new head of state, looked at his sister for a long moment and then said, "She is very small." "She will get bigger," Owen said. "Good," Eli said with great practicality. "She is too small to do anything." Clara, as though she had heard this, immediately grabbed Eli's finger, and Eli looked at his finger in her grip, and then at Owen with an expression of absolute wonder that Pauline committed to memory on the spot. "She is strong," Eli said. "Yes," Pauline said. "She can stay," Eli decided, and went back to his supper. Owen caught Pauline's eye over the children, and the particular look that passed between them was everything, years of it, the whole weight of what they had built together in one glance. By 1890, Harlan Creek had grown to nearly 700 people, which was still a small town but a growing one, with a proper school building now and a bank and a telegraph office and a second doctor who had come to assist Dr. Caldwell. The Silver Spur Saloon had been joined by a competing establishment that everyone agreed was inferior, and which served as a useful reminder that the original thing was often the best. Burl Cassidy had retired and sold the grain merchant business to a younger man from San Antonio who was fair in his dealings with everyone, men and women alike, which Pauline had verified in their first transaction, and which she had told several of the other farming women in the area to take note of. The farm was 8 years old as a working operation under Pauline and Owen together, and it ran with the smoothness of something that has been built carefully and maintained with care. Esteban and Rosario had 2 children of their own now, and the 4 children were a community unto themselves. Eli serious and horseman-focused, and quietly devoted to both of the younger Esteban children, Clara loud and certain, and already the social organizer of whatever group she was in. On a Sunday afternoon in September of 1890, which was a day of extraordinary light, the kind of September light that came in Texas at that angle in that month and made everything look both vivid and slightly unreal, Owen and Pauline were sitting on the back porch in the afternoon. Eli was in the stable with Esteban. Clara was playing in the yard, performing some elaborate and self-directed drama that involved a great deal of running and commentary. Rosario was in the garden. The farm was in the quiet between lunch and evening, and the creek could be heard faintly in the distance. Pauline had her coffee, because she always had coffee in the afternoons now, the good coffee, the habit of which had started with Owen showing up on a Sunday morning with a bag and an opinion about what everyone deserved. "Do you know what I've been thinking about?" she said. "Something useful," Owen said, because she almost always was. "I've been thinking about 8 years ago," she said. "About the Friday morning you fell into the water trough," he laughed. "That horse did not tell me what he intended. Cass has never told anyone what he intends," she said. "He simply does it and expects accommodation." "Much like our daughter," Owen said. "Much like our daughter," she agreed. She looked out at the field, the same field where she had laughed for the first time in 3 years, standing by the fence post with her hand pressed to her mouth and the tears on her face and no idea what was happening to her until it was already happening. "I didn't know," she said, "that I hadn't laughed. Not until I did." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about what that means," she said. "About how you can be so far inside a thing that you don't know it's there. The grief, the quiet of it. I thought that was just what my life was. I thought I had decided that and it was decided." Owen turned to look at her. "You never seemed like a woman who had decided to be unhappy," he said. "I hadn't decided it," she said. "It just happened. The way cold happens when you've been out in it long enough. You stop noticing because noticing doesn't change the temperature." He reached over and took her hand. She looked at his hand holding hers, the familiar sight of it, the scarred knuckles and the solid grip she had been holding for 8 years. "I am glad you rode into that water trough," she said. "I am glad every decision I ever made in my life led me to that particular water trough," he said. She laughed. She laughed because she could, because it came easily now, because it had been given back to her 8 years ago on a September afternoon and had not left since. He was watching her laugh the way he had always watched her laugh, since the very first time in the wheat field, with that look of care and warmth and perfect attention, as though each time was still something he was glad to witness, something he did not take for granted. Clara ran across the yard below the porch and tripped over nothing in particular, fell, sat up, looked at her scraped hands with indignation, said something Pauline preferred not to have heard, stood up and kept running, all without pausing the dramatic narrative she was narrating to herself. "She is entirely her own person," Pauline said. "She is," Owen agreed. "She is magnificent. Don't tell her that, she will use it." "She already knows it," he said. Eli appeared at the stable door and looked up at the porch with those steady brown eyes that were so much his father's, saw his parents sitting together in the afternoon light, and nodded once in the way that meant everything was as it should be, and went back into the stable. The September light moved across the yard and the fields and the rooftops of the farm buildings, and the creek ran somewhere in the distance, and Clara kept running, and the horses moved in the stable, and the coffee was warm in her hand, and the hand in hers was warm too, and Pauline Fletcher sat in the fullness of everything she had built from the wreckage and the silence of 3 years before. From a Friday morning and a man in a water trough, and a laugh she had not known was missing until it came back to her. She thought about Mrs. Hatch's handkerchief, pressed into her palm at the church door on the day of Daniel's funeral, and how she had folded it and handed it back because she had not needed it. She thought about the blue sky and the shovel and the cold November wind. She thought about 3 years of one plate, one cup, washed and dried and put back every night. She did not think about these things with grief anymore. She thought about them with the care a person takes with something that shaped them, something that was real and true and part of the road that led here. Here to this porch, to this hand, to the laugh that had come back and never left. "Owen," she said. "Pauline," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in the September afternoon with the life they had made all around them. And it was everything, and it was enough, and it was more than enough. And she was glad, down to the marrow of her bones, in the way you are only glad when you have known what it is to be without something and have found it again and understand the weight and the worth of it. Below the porch, Clara ran and narrated and fell and got up. In the stable, Eli talked to the horses in his father's calm voice. Esteban and Rosario moved through the garden in the gold light. The creek ran. The horses stood in their stalls. The wheat field was empty now, waiting for spring, and the corn was cut, and the earth was resting. And Pauline laughed again, softly, at nothing and everything, at the absurd gift of being alive and present in a world that had once gone very quiet and gray and had come back, color by color and sound by sound, until it was this. She could not have said when exactly the last of the gray had gone. She thought it had gone that afternoon in the wheat field, or rather she thought that was the moment she noticed it was going. It had probably been leaving for months before that, from the first Friday at the post office, from the Sunday mornings with coffee, from the steady accumulation of Sundays, from the moment she told him she did not know what this was, and he had said it was allowed to be that way. It had left and kept leaving until one afternoon in a wheat field, a laugh came out of her like water from the ground, and she could not stop it, and she had not wanted to stop it, and she had not stopped it. She had not laughed in 3 years, and she had not known it until he made her, and she could not stop. She had not stopped since. She did not intend to. Outside, the September light moved and changed and spread itself over the whole of Harlan Creek and the farms and the fields and the creek itself, over all of it, generous and golden and completely indifferent to how much any of it meant. The way good light always is, falling equally on everything, not knowing and not needing to know that for one woman on a back porch holding a cup of coffee and a scarred and calloused hand, it was falling on the whole world.